Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening's meeting. This is the third network meeting for Don't Bank on the Bomb UK. My name's Sarah. I am the Peace and Security Campaign Lead at MedAct, and I'm supporting the Don't Bank on the Bomb project, which is the core campaign project for our nuclear weapons campaigning group this year. As you can see on the slide, Don't Bank on the Bomb is a grassroots campaign dedicated to ending the financial support for the production and development of nuclear weapons. Every year, billions of pounds flow through our banks, pension funds, and financial institutions that invest in companies producing nuclear weapons, making the threat of nuclear war even more real. We're demanding as a campaign that these financial institutions move their money away from companies that manufacture and trade in weapons of mass destruction. And we're inviting you to join us as we build a nationwide campaigning movement, applying pressure to ensure these institutions withdraw their support for the nuclear weapons industry. So this is our third network meeting, and at these typically we have fantastic guest speakers to talk about an area relevant to either nuclear divestment specifically or divestment broadly. And today we actually are really lucky to be joined by four fantastic speakers. Hopefully four will be able to join us. We've got three present at the moment. And I'm just going to sit back, remind you actually just briefly, if you can keep yourselves muted through the presentations, that would be great and really helpful for us because we're recording the event. And then we're going to have a Q&A with our speakers just after they've shared a bit about their own work in divestment campaigning and the world of campaigning around different justice issues that are definitely in alignment with MedAct and Don't Bank on the Bomb. And then we'll have time to give you some updates on the campaign specifically about what our next steps are and about different actions you can get involved with. So first up, I'm going to, hopefully this works if I try and go to the next slide. Yes, introduce our first speaker, who is Stella Swain. Stella is the Youth and Students Campaign Officer at Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is the largest organisation in Europe campaigning in solidarity with the Palestinian people's struggle for freedom, justice and liberation. Just quickly, I'm going to go through all the speakers just so I don't have to reshare this screen again, but we'll come back to Stella. We've got Jinsella with us as well. Jinsella is co-founder and executive director of Demilitarise Education, which hosts the world's first universities and arms database and model for a comprehensive demilitarization. Her work has led to the uncovering of 2.2 billion, more than 2.2 billion of UK university partnerships with the arms trade. And it's really nice to have you, Jinsella. Thank you for joining us. We've also got Kirsten. Kirsten is Campaign Against the Arms Trades Outreach Coordinator, working out of CAT's London office. And she's been involved with CAT as a volunteer, as a board director, and as a staff member since 2011. She's also the current chair of the Nuclear Information Service, which is a non-profit that investigates and reports on the UK's nuclear weapons programme. And lastly, I'm going to introduce Nick, who I'm just going to also double check if he's present with us and potentially able to present. But Nick Cantrell is the founder and president of Green Future Wealth Management, which is based in Massachusetts. He's worked side by side with clients as a financial advisor for over 15 years. He founded Green Future Wealth Management to provide holistic financial planning that's independent and deeply rooted in the values of his clients. And he's been recognized by Forbes as one of the top next-gen wealth advisors and named one of the top 100 people in finance. So really finance-specific advice and hopefully some information that'll be useful for us in our divestment campaigning from Nick. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. And I'll also just, double check to see if Nick has been able to join us. Nick, are you able to join us right now?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Okay, perfect. I will just spotlight you for everyone present, and I'll hand over to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for accommodating me. I've got a meeting here in 20 minutes, so letting me go first was really great. I'm happy to be here. Like you'd said, I am the founder and the president of Green Future Wealth Management, but I also do a lot of nonprofit work with a US-based ICANN affiliate and have worked with a number of folks around the globe now on divestment and participated in some of the UN conferences for the TPNW signatories in Vienna and New York. So I'm happy to be here today and talk through a little bit about divestment. And I didn't have anything formalized, but I did want to talk through just a little bit on strategy. And when I'm working with folks that are looking to implement divestment as a strategy, I really think of it as one of the available strategies around the financial strategies around pressuring the profiteers. And there are a few other ones that we look at. Divestment is typically the first one that folks will focus on. And I do think that divestment as a strategy, which taking a step back, divestment basically means making the choice to avoid investing in any company, either holding stock or bond in that company or any other asset, based on a variety of criteria. In this case, we're discussing nuclear weapons here, but it could be for environmental performance as well. And I do think on the nuclear issue in particular, divestment is a really effective strategy. And I think part of that reason is because oftentimes when we're looking at putting pressure on profiteers, oftentimes the most effective strategy is utilizing some sort of a shareholder engagement, working with sustainable asset managers who will work with the corporation and really pressure them to improve environmental practices, say on greenhouse gas emissions or water usage or labor relations or whatever it may be. But within the nuclear weapons space, it's much more difficult because the companies that are involved are less likely to engage on the issue. Northrop Grumman is, they are a defense company. And so the idea of being able to utilize direct shareholder engagement as a stock owner, go to a corporate shareholder meeting, try to convince them that they need to essentially put themselves out of business. It's just not going to work. So I do think that divestment itself is an effective strategy within the nuclear weapons space, but I think that it needs to be coupled with a campaign that's more public. When I work with individuals or organizations that say, right now we have very broad investments and we may invest in indexes, we may invest in a wide variety of investments, and we're not trying to own nuclear weapon manufacturers, but we know that they're mixed in there with everything else. We can, through some of the tools that we use and through our process, we can restructure investment portfolios to get rid of them, which is good. It meets the client's goals of not owning these companies that are not a fit for their values anymore. But it doesn't really impact the company, because if we sell the stock, some other company or some other investor will just purchase it. So I've really encouraged clients to notify the company by sending either a letter or an email or both, sending a letter and making it a public letter, stating that they've sold their holdings in that company, and the specific reason that they've done it is due to their involvement in nuclear weapons manufacturing or nuclear weapons finance, if that's the company's involvement that you wanted to divest from. And I do think that it's coupling the action with the public statement that tends to deliver the most impact. So that's something that I would always encourage folks to do. The other thing that I would just make mention of, one of the some of the work that we're doing at our nonprofit right now, I serve on the board of a not-for-profit in the U.S. that's an ICANN affiliate, as well as I serve on a separate entity that's involved in lobbying and trying to push the United States to embrace the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And in some of the work that we're doing is to try to build a more comprehensive coalition that brings in the environmental movement as well. We've called it the Warheads to Windmills Coalition, and we've got over 100 different organizations, some quite large, that have now become part of it. Some, that are global, but many that are either national in the United States or state based. And so I do think that I generally tend to think of nuclear weapons and as not only an existential threat, but as a bigger piece of the environmental crisis right now. So much of the focus on the environmental crisis is focused on carbon emissions, and rightfully so. But environmental threat is actually a lot more comprehensive than that. We have issues with obviously carbon, which gains most of the focus, but plastic pollution, water degradation. It's multifaceted, and I tend to view nuclear weapons within that larger context of their impact on the environment. And we have been, I think, we're still in the early stages of it. We've been doing this work only for about a year, building this coalition, but it has been pretty effective, and it's really amplified our audience. And I think we're building a group that is much larger and bringing the issue of nuclear weapons to, I think, a much broader coalition. So I'd encourage you in the UK to see if there are opportunities for branching out and bringing in folks who have environmental concern, because of course it's just a much larger group, and I think that there's a lot of synergies there and overlap, and a lot of people who are currently in the environmental movement are really aligned, but maybe just not focused on the work. That's it.
Thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, that speaks so much to a lot of what we've been campaigning on, and how I guess our campaigning group's focuses have shifted in the last 6-7 months. We are quite an early going campaign, but we're thinking a lot about coalition building, a lot about the public facing nature of the campaigning work, so that there's a visible accountability with these kinds of banks and financial institutions that we target. And I think, the us being stronger together as divestment campaigners really speaks, I think, to what we're finding useful, or we're finding most impactful here too. So thank you so much for joining us, even in that very tight time slot that you have. It's much appreciated. And I'm really excited now to hand over to Stella, who's from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who's also going to share with us her reflections on divestment campaigning in her work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for having me here. It's really great to speak to you guys. And I think to put a bit of that work that we were just talking about of coalition building into practice, and thinking about the different overlaps between our campaigning work and the different kind of struggles that we're part of. I work at PSC. I'm our youth and student campaigns organizer. So I work with young people, mainly mobilizing students and supporting them in their campaigning for universities to divest from companies complicit in Israel's ongoing genocide. But I also do organising with young people outside universities, so whether that's in their trade union, in their workplace, or just outside university, around BDS campaigning. And BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, which is a kind of trio of tactics, which we use a lot in the Palestine Solidarity movement, but is actually inspired by the movement that ended apartheid in South Africa in the 1980s. And it's important to recognize that these are just three tactics. So the kind of term BDS often gets like bandied around as a bit of a scare quotes term, but it just means boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So in a way, anyone doing divestment is doing BDS campaigning because it's one of those tactics. So yeah, just for anyone who doesn't know, PSC is the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. We're a democratic organisation. We've been campaigning since the 70s in solidarity with the Palestinian people's struggle for liberation. We've got nearly 100 branches in cities, towns, and villages across the country. And that's because we know that it's by building local power in our communities, by meeting our neighbours and coming together in every corner of the country, that we can force our government and corporations to take notice. And I think that that's true whether we're campaigning on Palestine, on nuclear weapons, on climate, or whatever our campaign is. It's really about finding those community roots and that organising in your local environment, but also with the people around you, to kind of force that change that we need to see. And we run campaigns with our Palestinian partners on international complicity using the tactics I mentioned of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And I thought that I would use this space tonight to actually talk with you guys about some of the real wins that we've seen recently. I think it's really important in our campaigns that we make some space to celebrate those wins, to recognise them as moments of material change, and to also use them as a tactic to push for even greater victories. I think it's really important that we don't, go either one of the two ways of seeing like a victory as a really small thing. Like we don't even need to talk about it because ultimately Palestine isn't free yet, or ultimately the nuclear industry has not been dismantled yet. Like it's still worthwhile to celebrate our small divestment victory. But at the same time, it's important not to get hung up on one victory and be like, this is it. This is the one thing we now have finished campaigning, and we can just all go home, because obviously we've got a long struggle ahead of us. So yeah, as I mentioned, I work with a lot of students. My role involves doing a lot of organising with students, and last year we saw amazing kind of upsurgence in student organising on campus, around Palestine, with 35 encampments at universities all over Britain, which were united in their demand for divestment from complicit companies, and they wanted an end to all university complicity in Israel's ongoing genocide. So just quickly what that means: universities have investments, whether that be direct or indirect, in lots of different companies, and many of those companies that they invest in have complicity with the ongoing genocide and Israel's apartheid regime, and whether that's because they're military companies like BAE Systems, or whether that's because they're, for example, banks like Barclays, who provide loans and underwriting to companies that allow Israel's aggression to continue. Or whether they are tech companies that allow Israel to maintain its system of apartheid. So all of those kinds of companies are the ones that we're asking for divestment from. And at the time, so last summer, Swansea University divested £5 million from Barclays Bank, which was incredible. And the encampments were also significant in the student power that they kind of built and the wins that we've seen since then. So last month, King's College Cambridge announced that it will divest fully from arms companies and those complicit in illegal occupation by the end of this calendar year. And that's really significant because their updated investment policy specifically references Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian land, which with an investment policy like this, in theory, future investments, should be, if the college applies by its own rules, not complicit in Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people. So that's a massive win, and it comes after over a year of campaigning by students at the college and the university as a whole, including in the encampment and student occupations in 2024. So on this, in April this year, we launched our updated university complicity database, which I will try and link in the chat. Oh, thanks, Sarah, for linking more about our BDS work. That's really great. So we compile this database every 2 years by sending freedom of information requests to every university in the country. Not all of them respond, even though they should. And I'm sure that we'll hear more from the lovely Jinsella later about how freedom of information requests are used by many different campaigning groups to find out information about divestment. But we basically use this information as a tool to track universities' complicit investments and as something that students can use to build their campaigns on campus. So our research this year found that UK universities collectively invest almost £460 million in companies complicit in Israel's regime of apartheid and genocide. So that is an absurdly large amount of money. And we campaign for divestment in universities because Israel's genocidal attacks, its occupation, and its system of institutionalized racist discrimination against Palestinians, which amounts to the crime of apartheid, can only be sustained because of the weapons and technology and other support that it receives from these companies. So by lobbying our universities or our institutions to end this complicity, we can both shake that international impunity that Israel currently receives, and we hopefully make it more and more costly for these companies to stay complicit. So we want to make their balances tip because they're never going to listen to us just on a moral argument, companies like Barclays. So we have to hit them where it hurts. We also send a clear message to our universities that they should be places of learning, not factories for bombs. But it's also true that all banks, pension funds, universities, and local governments have a responsibility to withdraw their support from Israel's genocide in Gaza. And this year, we've seen massive successes outside universities as well. So I just wanted to flag most recently, Oxford City Council unanimously passed a motion calling on Oxfordshire Pension Fund to divest from companies involved in, the quote is, grave violations of human rights, such as through the production of weapons and military technology used to commit violations of international law. And we've also seen similar motions passed at Dudley Council, in Sandwell, at Tower Hamlets, in Bristol, Somerset, Manchester, Lewisham, Waltham Forest, and Islington. So that's like quite a few London boroughs, but also really we see that breadth of campaigning across the country because people are really organising in their local communities, working with their Unison branches often in the councils, and lobbying local councillors with some amazing successes. And one of PSC's core targets, which I'm hoping that Kirsten will speak about, because we campaign a lot with Campaign Against Arms Trade on this, is Barclays Bank. As I've mentioned, they invest over £2 billion in and provide financial services worth £6 billion to companies whose weapons, components, and military technology are used by Israel in its military attacks on Palestinians. So we're calling for a mass boycott of all Barclays services until the bank ends that complicity in Israel's genocidal attacks. And I'm sure I don't need to say it in this space, but I think it's really important that we remember why we do this organising. So why we're organising around Palestine, why we're campaigning for divestment. And I'm sure that the parallels are there with why you're campaigning for nuclear disarmament. As we speak, Palestinians are starving. On Sunday, Israel massacred at least 31 Palestinians and injured 170 as they tried to access food after nearly a month of no aid reaching Gaza. Meanwhile, our government is refusing to impose an arms embargo on Israel and continues to provide military technology that's being used to murder Palestinians every day and has been doing for almost 2 years. But we can't lose hope because Palestinians don't have that luxury. So they're continuing to live and to struggle for a future where they can finally live in freedom. So together, by taking action where we are, I think it's important to know that we have the potential to create that real power and to build a mass movement that's capable of tackling our government's shameful complicity, whether it's on Palestine or nuclear energy or fossil fuels. I do think it's that people power that is going to make the change that we need to see. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stella. That was amazing and really great to hear both about the kind of successes and difficulties of organising and doing divestment work within, with young people in the university space, but also how it is active around local authorities and in communities. And it's a tool that I think really galvanizes people on a local level. There are just a few things that I picked up on what you shared, which were, I think, the kind of ability to recognize that, you know, in our nuclear disarmament work, it has been written about and spoken about, but there are impacted communities we can speak to, even though it feels quite like a subject that feels quite removed or hypothetical. But communities who have been impacted by nuclear testing over the years, I think, would be a really important way of grounding our work and continuing to ground our work in solidarity, like material solidarity, in the way that PSC does. And then also thinking about it was really interesting hearing you speak about how in universities students over the last year have become more galvanized, just because I know that, you know, obviously the marketization of higher education is absolutely horrendous, and people are paying extortionate amounts of money for their university courses now. But I wonder if that has actually, you know, given way to a kind of argument that might reach a more apolitical student, to say, do you want your money going here? And it's actually really like important for people to know where their money is being spent. And even if it's not, you know, if it's not going directly to the institution, it's going to these military organizations, that feels so egregious, I can imagine, and is. And then the last thing I was just going to share were two links. So one was that in terms of Don't Bank on the Bombs, local campaigning work, we put out an open letter a month ago or so now, just focused on 5 banks in the UK who are investing in nuclear weapons manufacturers. We got over 500 signatures from our movement on that and sent it to the bank branches and have started receiving those letters back. But we've also just put kind of as a resource, people can download that open letter and take it to their local bank branch. And we really want that to be something that if you're here and thinking of a way that you can take action, please do download it, take it to your local bank branch. Even just having a conversation with that branch manager might be really impactful for them to escalate or them to feel the impact of their local community trying to organize against this. And the last thing was that directly related to Palestine Solidarity, alongside MENACT, we have a health worker-led campaign called Health Workers for a Free Palestine, which I'll just link to their campaign against Palantir as well in this message I've just put in the chat. So if you're interested in either downloading that open letter and trying to use this as a resource to take more localized action, please do. But if you're also interested in that campaign, please also read more about it as a way to express solidarity within the health space. And that's everything I'll say. But I'll hand over now to Jinsella, who I've introduced at the start, who's from Demilitarise Education, who is going to share with us more about their organization's work within the university space. So Jinsella, over to you.
Hi everyone, it's so good to see you all, and thank you so much to Nick. It's really great to learn about your organization. I'm sure there's a lot for us all to learn from your principles. Shout out to Stella as well. PSC have just been doing such amazing campaigning. I know Stella has really been spearheading that over the last year, and we can all kind of resonate with how important our research infrastructures and campaigning models have been, particularly since the ongoing genocide in Gaza, since October 2023. So big shout out to that. And of course, I'm looking forward to hearing Kirsten as well. Always love. I mean, Campaign Against Arms Trade is our godfather organization, really. We started off the back of your principles, so big respect. So a bit more about Demilitarise Education. We are a non-profit organisation working for a world where universities champion peace, not war. We host the world's first University in Arms database, which so far has uncovered over £2 billion worth of UK university partnerships with the arms trade. It's 2.2 billion at the moment, and we're currently in the processing stage of, it's about 400 FOIs. So by the end of the year, we're predicting that's going to at least double. It's really staggering figures, and particularly when we're thinking about it in the ideological concepts and reality of how much our education system is archetyping our societies. And divestment is obviously such a key part of that. I think the best place to start with the explanation of like how we work is really by outlining what that £2 billion actually means. And then I'll be able to kind of draw connections between MEDAC's amazing new report and toolkit on how divestment is possible within the nuclear realm as well. So that 2.2 billion currently is made up of research partnerships, academic partnerships, and investment partnerships. So the research is, as it sounds, arms companies will actually buy out research capacity, and they will pay for arms orientated agendas within higher education. And that is by far our largest value position within those categories. Then we have the academic partnerships. So this is often the most present aspect in partnership on campus. It's promotion of careers, graduate schemes, it's consultancy as well, or donorship, where you might see a new building sponsored by someone at the University of Manchester. The Graphene Institute has BAE Systems directors and partnerships there. They also have partnerships with Technion, an Israeli university, and so on. And then we have investment. So while research and academic is largely arms companies buying out university space and capacity, investment is when the universities will buy shares or put their investments into pooled investment holdings, which are connected to arms companies. And that means that they are profiting from arms company profits. So when we're thinking about divestment within that context and within the way that we work, it's not just financial. By all means, that is the first step. And when it comes to the way universities work, it's like the research and academic is their core bottom line infrastructure. They exist to uphold the values of intellectual freedom, academic freedom, and studentship. Whereas their investment portfolios is a side hustle for them. So in the context of divestment, we see the quickest turnarounds and the most engagement in the financial divestment. And we saw that last year at York University. They changed their investment policy to no longer include arms companies. We also saw it at King's College London. It was a very controversial move, which was persuaded by the Palestine encampments, and the university changed their investment policy to no longer deal with arms companies that make controversial weapons. Now, while that is all brilliant, it actually doesn't include any of the arms companies which they currently were dealing with. For example, BAE Systems only makes conventional weapons. Did I just say that the right way around? Okay, hopefully. But yeah, so controversial and conventional. Like a lot of the time, they'll try and sneak past those partnerships by just saying we're going to not work with controversial, which seems like the right thing to do, but nothing BAE Systems make is apparently falling under the other one. So yeah, there was then a massive student motion where over 1,000 students voted to see that it was full arms exclusion with conventional and controversial. So we're really waiting now to see whether admin are going to listen to that. And as Stella pointed out as well, this call from King's College Cambridge to divest from Israeli assets, as it's not just Israeli assets, it's arms exclusionary policy, is huge, is absolutely huge. And we really need to be on their case right now to make sure that the policy isn't filled with the same kind of loopholes that we saw at King's College London. And that's what's really brilliant about the Don't Bank on a Bomb toolkit that's just come out. It has advice on how to write policy to make sure that nuclear weapons are not going through those loopholes in the same way that, for example, BAE Systems often does, because they make conventional weapons and not controversial weapons. I think this has also been where we've been really well positioned as an organization, and like I like to make sure that everyone is aware. We've been advising many of the student groups and encampments on policy negotiation, and this is crucial because a lot of the time our campaigns can be very contextual to the moment and current affairs, and then waste time, which with our negotiations with administrators, which is very, very small. We have very, very tiny windows to be actually talking with senior leadership at universities about divestments. And if our demands are too wide, they often are up for debate rather than going into these negotiation spaces with very, very clear policy demands. You know, I want this word to change to this. And making that means that those meetings can be much more productive and we see a lot quicker change. So yeah, we've been really well positioned, and our data has been really supportive for investment divestment, but it does go deeper. And I think we can't have this conversation without talking about the way that our university governance systems are really upholding imperial state power. There's a much wider call for non-hierarchical governance within universities so that we can understand that the militarization of education is not just an economic influence and power, but it's also ideological. We are preparing students for the future labor market and providing much more valuable opportunities for students that are welcoming and skilled enough to move into arms industries and war industries. And that really needs to change. We are seeing it not just in universities as well. The Forces Watcher has done some incredible research exposing that over £90 million since 2012 has been spent promoting military ethos in schools. And that really is where the ideological manipulation, the social licensing of war and militarism is gained. And students are leaving those lower years of education with a real deficit of hope, a real sense of this is just the way the world works and I just need to do my best to get a good job now. And that is a complete failure of our ability to be able to build a peaceful world. Then in universities, that's really where we see the economic grip hold that arms companies have on our higher education institutions. And as I said, that 2.2 billion is just what our tiny team has found. It's, of course, a lot heavier than that. And there is a aligned political agenda which for the militarization and marketization of higher education, which we can trace back to the 80s and beyond. So, yes, please do look up our work. Please do get in contact. We are also hosting or about to launch an open letter soon for kind of a nationwide umbrella. It's really a precedent-changing objective behind it so that we can kind of do that big national push to support more specific campus campaigns and demands. Yeah, I really just want to encourage everyone to continue all the amazing work they're doing. Continue pushing for divestment on all forms, continue to push for accountability and democracy on all levels of governance. There is no pocket small enough to avoid divestment. Every pocket of money and financing really counts and moves towards the kind of successes we saw when ending the South African apartheid, and that we're continue to seeing in our smaller sectors at the moment. So thank you so much for having me. Please get in contact if you're interested in finding out more, and yes, keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Jinsella. That's amazing. It was, so great to hear more about your organization's work, as with the previous speakers too. And yeah, really helpful to kind of ground it as well in the particularities of the university space. I think one resonant thing was the particularity of language and how language becomes this, like, I guess, obfuscator for the demands we want to make, where institutions like universities, but also private, banks that we see use the language of like controversial weapons, conventional weapons, and nuclear weapons aren't included in whichever category, I forget which one it is now, the same as you, that they use and reference in their policies. And that's what the open letter we've sent to those 5 banks is trying to ask, that nuclear weapons are included as controversial weapons in their existing policies. But yeah, and the other thing I was just going to say was that I think the idea of recently, as yesterday, the government did announce the results of their defence review, which many of you would have already seen the highlights of. So a major announcement being like £15 billion to spend further on nuclear warheads in the UK. A horrific move in the exact wrong direction. But additionally, one of the recommendations, if I'm not mistaken, was about kind of the communication of the importance of nuclear deterrence and the kind of like the communications angle of things, the potential to include the presence of nuclear manufacturer representatives within university spaces as this kind of like overlap that you've been speaking of like continues. So it's not just that, it's a policy that people think will make money and make jobs, but rather that it's a really concerted effort we see happening from the top down to try and convince like people that this is needed and normal in a way of like sustaining our society. And so yeah, I guess the fight works both ways. But yeah, it's really lovely to hear from you. I'm just going to quickly share a few links in the chat for people to have a look through as I introduce, and I'll hand over to our final speaker, Kirsten from Campaign Against the Arms Trade, who, to echo Jinsella, I feel like I've admired CAT's work for a really long time. They're like such a foundational institution organization that's been campaigning against the arms trade since I kind of came into my own political consciousness. So it's going to be really lovely to hear more about your active work right now, Kirsten, organizationally and in the divestment space. So I'll hand over to you, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if anyone has any questions in mind, any thoughts, comments on what people have shared, please do make a note of them, but also pop them in the chat if you want someone else to read it out. Kirsten, go for it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm going to just share some slides, so just bear with me as I do that. So you got something to look at. That's not my face. Hang on. There we go. Oh, interesting. Hopefully you can see that. All right. So yeah, so thank you. Really appreciate it, and so nice to see Jinsella and Stella here as well, because that was both amazing. I'm big fans. So as I say, my name's Kirsten. I'm CAT's outreach coordinator. I'm just going to. What I'm going to do a little bit is maybe take a step back, remind people what the arms trade is and who the arms trade is, and then talk about how we tend to organise our campaigning. And then I definitely want to talk about the Barclays campaign and also some of the stuff about insurance and pensions, because I think that's quite important. Those are kind of current things that we're kind of working on. The pension stuff in particular is kind of a new thing that's kind of growing with us. So what the arms trade is, this is the arms trade. As you can see, sort of planes, tanks, ships, machine guns, and in the top left corner, drones. But mostly, when we're talking about the UK's arms exports, which CAT tends to focus on, mostly the UK exports aerospace. In other words, it does warplanes, it does missiles, and it does the components for those, as well as drones. So in terms of its exports, that's what it does. I'd say that if you look at the arms industry as a whole, 2/3 of it is government funded. In other words, we've got a sort of 22, 23, 24 billion pound industry, of which 2/3 is basically for so-called home use, and that comes out of taxation. 1/3 is paid for by foreign governments and the form of arms exports. So that's the industry we're looking at. two main components to the arms industry: buyers and sellers. Who are the sellers? Well, they're arms dealers. In the UK, the way to think of the UK arms industry is you could probably divide it in half. You could just say there's BAE Systems and there's everybody else. So BAE Systems are far and away the country's largest arms company, formed by kind of merging all these different companies together, much larger than, if you like, the other parts of the industry. So whenever you're thinking about the arms industry in the UK, BAE Systems, by the way, makers of, we're going to say, the replacement submarines, the Vanguard submarines, really important. Another big UK arms supplier is Rolls-Royce, who make the engines for the nuclear submarines. By the way, big deal for them, obviously announced as part of the review, and often not listed as arms companies in investments, just to say. Rolls-Royce often not thought of as an arms company. Well, they very much are. But so you've got BAE Systems, to a lesser degree, Rolls-Royce as the kind of UK arms industry. But then you've also got, if you like, factories and subunits of large American arms companies. So Raytheon is a big manufacturer in the UK. Lockheed Martin doesn't make any stuff here, but it has a really big kind of research facility down in Hampshire. Basically all of the US arms companies have subsidiaries here, and they make up the second tier, if you like, of the UK's arms industry establishment. And the third bit of the UK's arms industry are the components makers. And if you look at the value of the stuff that we export in terms of arms exports, half of the stuff is in finished weapons. So I'm just going to scroll back up. This kind of stuff, like, finished planes, finished ships, those kind of things. But the other half is actually components. So when you're thinking about identifying who makes stuff, who's involved with the arms industry, what is the arms industry, that's what it is. It's BAE Systems, big systems, lots of integration, that sort of stuff. Footprints from US arms companies and then components manufacturers. That's the arms industry. 2/3 of it paid for by the British taxpayer, 1/3 paid for by exports. And the people who buy the exports, you're looking at them. That's the Saudis. That's the Saudi government being walked around DSCI by the British government, who are trying to sell them weapons. But typically, when you think about where does the stuff go, half of UK arms exports go to the Middle East. The Saudis, the Qataris, the Israelis to a lesser degree are the big arms buyers. And then we ship to North America, they ship to us. We ship to Europe, they ship to us. But the net exports almost always the Middle East. And by the way, these are not nice guys. These are guys who are involved in conflict. That was the Yemen conflict that's still going, by the way. It's just that British and American are still dropping the bombs. They're involved in repression, policing and human rights abuses, and they're involved in corruption, particularly in funding. And I think this is where we really like to focus on things like banking, that sort of thing. The arms industry is the generator of large quantities of dirty cash, and stopping the investment going into the arms industry, querying where that money is made, questioning how people are profiting from it, is a key part of the resistance to it. And so I'd like to, a little bit in the next couple of slides, maybe talk a little bit about how that looks. First thing I was going to say is, you remember we were talking about types of weapons, buyers and sellers. Here's an example of a typical campaign, as it were, where we're effectively looking at the sale of the F-35, which is an aircraft, by, let's face it, BAE Systems, to Israel. And what you're seeing here is where the plane is made. Those are the main manufacturing facilities, and all these little dots, those are the components that are involved in the manufacture of the F-35. And so when you're thinking about investments, especially when you're thinking about divestments, if you think about who is your local council or whoever invested in, I'd recommend you take a look at this map, because this is the map of all the people who are involved in the arms industry, not just what you might call formal arms makers. And so if you've got a list of your council's investments, you've got a copy of this map, you can really track down some of the bad stuff that's going on. That's the first thing to say. So we have been with our friends at PSC and War on Want for the last 2 years, been campaigning against Barclays. We did a report that basically looked at the 13F reports. This is the SEC filings from Barclays, and discovered indeed that they had a couple of £1 billion worth of investments in the arms industry that's involved with attacking Israel, attacking Palestinians. Large chunks of it was kind of what you call assets under management. So in other words, they were basically being told by their customers to invest in index funds, that kind of thing. But what was also true is they were providing loans and shareholding relationships and underwriting to a lot of companies involved in that, in particular Elbit. And so over the last 2 years, we start with visiting them. We visited them at the head office. We wrote to them several times. Did we get a response? We did not. So we started protesting each of their bank branches, 30, 40, 50 bank branches at a time, mostly PSC supporters, God bless them, really exciting. We then started to go to the AGM, and our friends here, this was last month. These are people who went to the AGM, but sadly were thrown out of it for, putting forward the Palestinian cause. And the idea is really to put pressure on Barclays to divest. And they have, in fact, sold a lot of their shares in Elbit Systems, which is the main Israeli arms company. But what's also true is they are nevertheless still holding quite large shares in things like BAE Systems. And so we need to keep the pressure on them and just to keep the campaign going. Excuse me. So yeah, I think if you get the chance, definitely take a look at the Stop Arming Israel campaign. The PSC hosts the website, but we've all been quite closely involved, and it's been a really good thing to be doing. And you'll also find on the CAT website, you'll find the report where we basically looked at all these F13F filings and all the other stuff to work out who and what was being funded by them. I wanted to touch on universities. You'll find a report that we worked with Demilitarise Education from Ginsella, the University of Ginsella, written by Akopia Jonye, who I now work with over at Nuclear Information Service. It's all one big family about weaponizing universities. And actually, Akopia does talk quite a bit in there about nuclear work that's being done at universities, because that's a big source of funding. But I don't want to duplicate what Ginsella was just talking about. But definitely look that up. I think the third thing I was going to talk about was pensions and insurance, and maybe just spend a little bit of time on this. So what I would say is your local council, local universities for sure, government in general, but in particular local government, has really large pension investments. We're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pounds. You can, if you are so minded, get hold of details of that investment, and people have been doing that up and down the country. We heard about Bristol, we heard about Somerset. I was working with them. We've got another campaign going in Islington, which will be having demonstrations next week. And the idea, I think, with that is to basically examine where pension funds in particular are holding their funds. And what we discovered again is that a lot of the organizations are basically pooling their pension investments to a series of what you might call mega funds. And the government are increasingly pushing for local councils to basically start pooling their investments into these mega funds. And the challenge that you have is that once they go into these large funds, the amount of influence that any one of us can have over a really large funding investment is quite limited. So I think the first thing to say is you can go to your local council, you can actually freedom of information request where their investments are. It's also often stored online. You can then compare it to the list of arms companies that we have on the CAT website, F-35 manufacturers, and you can actually see where your investments are going. And if anybody here on this call is doing that and is finding it a little bit hard because they don't know all the arms companies and they don't know all the investments, you can give me a call, because I can go through it really quickly and help spot that. The second thing to say is the local council has these investments, but also so do you. So do you as a person. If your pension fund, if you've not looked at where your pension is being stored in, almost certainly 90% of people's pension is stored in the default fund of their pension scheme with their employer. I can guarantee you that if that's the case, you are invested in the arms industry. You must move your cash out of the default pension scheme of your pension pension provider. Now, the challenge that you have in doing that is, well, how do I, as a person, know that I'm moving it out of the default scheme? How do I know that the people, what I'm investing in, doesn't also invest in the arms industry? In other words, how do I move from one fund that invests in the arms industry into another? And the answer is that there are ethical funds that almost never invest in the arms industry, and there are also ESG funds which may invest in the arms industry, but not an awful lot. So I would say, as a default thing, move to an ethical fund, move to an ESG fund, but do some due diligence and go through who those companies are invested in. And you can do that by going to the website. And so helping people with that process is the kind of thing that we're currently working on at the moment. And I'm going to stop sharing. I'm just going to share a little document here. Just going to see if I can just show you this document here. We have a document that we are busy working on. Honestly, which is called How to Stop Your Workplace Pension Being Invested in the Arms Trade. And it basically goes through all I've just talked to you about: funds, tells you about equities and bonds. How do you know what funds you're invested in? How do you find out more information, like the key information document, all that stuff? Tells you about what an ESG fund is, what an ethical fund is, and how do you then get into the actual equities or the bonds that are being held using the key information document and the ISIN number. Goodness me. So there's a lot going on, but you can do this thing. And then you can actually decide to help your workplace, help yourself disinvest in the arms industry. So that's kind of what we're working on at the moment. And that's what I have for you in 8 minutes. So hopefully that's kind of give you a sense of some of the stuff that's going on. And if you'd like a link to this, I'll drop it into the chat.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That was a great 8 minutes, I'd say. Super informative and yeah, just also really helpful. I think that the pensions and insurance focus is one that we'll probably be in contact with Kat and thinking more about in the future as a campaign, just because, I mean, it's been raised at previous network meetings that we, as a campaign that's currently hosted by MedAct, which is a health justice organization working with health workers, should maybe do some research into kind of pension providers that are associated with particular health institutions or settings or workers, and then pick that as a potential target campaign if we do want to look into the pension funds of potential staff members in the NHS. We know that obviously a lot of NHS workers' pensions come directly from taxation. I think that's correct. So it would be kind of adjacent or health unions funds that they use for their staff's pension funds, etc. So yeah, I think it's a useful thing to start thinking about and make sure that we have kind of targets in mind in that arena as well, outside of the private, I guess, financial institutions and banks specifically. But thank you so much. I know Nick's had to drop off, and I know that Stella, if she's not already gone, would have to have gone. Stella has to leave maybe shortly. But hopefully Kirsten and Gisela will be able to stay with us just for a few questions, if there are any questions people would like to ask. Amazing, Stella will stay for one question. Thank you, Stella. If you have a question for Stella, now's the time. But if you have either comments or reflections on what's been shared around divestment, or if there's something new you've learned that you'd like to just hear our speakers reflect more on, please do just raise a hand or put it in the chat. We had one kind of question from Rena Well, who's a part of the kind of working group with Don't Bank on the Bomb, which was just, do we know that kind of exact proportion of our taxes being used to fund the arms trade as a whole? I know that we said that 2/3 of the current kind of existing ties are coming from taxation or our own funds, but it would be an interesting thing to consider how much proportionally that takes from the masses, and not that anyone here will have the precise figure, but it's, yeah, if anyone wanted to reflect on that or had anything, please do feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'm reading a comment from Molly just to say, can't figure out to raise my hand, but my question was mainly for Kirsten, but could be for anyone. Molly, please feel free to type it in the chat if you, or actually unmute yourself if you'd like to just ask it directly now.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the pension fund situation. As an NHS employee, everything kind of goes into NHS pension, and it's, you know, as you said, with the government. And I guess how do I go about finding out that particular information? Because or even how does one go about moving from an NHS pension to something more ethical when it's kind of mandated to us that this is our pension?
Yeah, if I can say, I mean, the first thing to say with things like the NHS pension and some of the council pensions is that where they're defined benefit schemes, where you've got a situation where effectively the government will be paying your future pension out of taxation. It's not really ethical or really easy to kind of move out of those kind of schemes. You have to talk to a pension advisor. They will tell you a whole bunch of stuff, and they'll just tell you don't do it. So, you know, I think with all this kind of stuff, do the best you can, but understand that sometimes perfect is not always possible. So that's true. But you may well find that you've got workplace pensions from other employers, previous employers, other companies. You may move out of the NHS into other schemes, and where you've got defined contribution schemes, I think the golden rule is whatever you do, move out of the default fund and do the best you can to pick a good fund that you're moving into. I guarantee you it will be better than the default fund, because I think one of the little sneaky tricks that the Chancellor was doing was essentially last week was talking about so-called UK investment of pension default funds in UK equity and UK private equity. And then the following week they announced they want to build 6 new really big arms factories with the best will in the world. It doesn't take a lot to put those two together. So I think that's what I would say about it is, yeah, if you're in something like the NHS scheme, or if you've got a defined benefit scheme, you know, you really don't have much choice in how those things are invested. You have to kind of stay with that. But for defined contribution schemes, yeah, definitely move out of the default fund and try and find an ethical or an ESG fund and do some due diligence. That's what I would say.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. Did any of our speakers want to reflect on that? If not, I will go to our next 2 questions. Yeah, Richard, Andrew, and then Michael. Andrew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, actually, Kirsten's kind of just partly answered my question, which was around government pressure to start investing. So the example I was going to bring was, or ask people to comment on, was the potential pressure to move people away from having cash ISAs to having stocks and shares ISAs, and then presumably going with that, it's going to be, and those stocks and shares will be invested in the arms industry. Am I right in thinking that? Does anyone have any comments on that?
In fact, I will jump in. The answer is yeah. I mean, that is a potential risk. You know, if you just buy an index fund that, you know, you might buy some of these things called whole market index funds, which are really popular. They will include arms company shares. But now you can buy these things called ESG index funds that basically have, we heard about these exclusions. They do exclude almost always controversial weapons, but many of them exclude conventional weapons. And so if you see that in this isn't the document I linked to, but if you see that in the key information document that they exclude conventional weapons, you can be pretty sure that there's no arms companies in there. I've gone through a bunch of them, and they were pretty arms company free. Though Rolls-Royce, bit sneaky, and sometimes you do get little sneaky ones go in. But technically, I guess they're making engines, not bombs. But I still wouldn't invest in them.
No, so as well as looking at pensions, people can look at if they've got ISAs, they can look at, can't they? So yeah, another avenue for campaign. Yep.
See you, Stella. Yeah, no, they go into the same funds. Your pension funds and ISAs, when they're stocks and share ISAs, are literally going into the same funds. So it's literally the same investments. They're just treated differently for tax.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, and it's useful to clarify as well. And just to say as well, I think part of that conversation around individual divestment for health workers, it's really difficult to think about, moving your money out of the NHS, his own pension situation. I think part of Don't Bank on the Bomb's aim and intention is to hopefully provide a home for people who, you've been able to move from your default pension fund, or you've been able to divest from your bank, and you're trying to, in the way that, Stella, Ginsella, and also, Kirsten's work means, is like bringing more people in who otherwise maybe have never thought about this before. I think that's equally as powerful, because so often I think people end at the initial personal divestment and then, that's the end of it. But I think this growing movement of people who are critical of the investment policies of their financial institutions just requires a continuing sharing of things and participation, I guess, in that sense. But I'll go to Michael, and then I'll go back to Molly, and then we'll take some more questions.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. I am in Don't Bank on the Bomb Scotland and Don't Bank on the Bomb UK, and a long-term member of MedAct. And my question was originally going to be for the 4 speakers. We're down to 2 now, so it's for the 2 that are left. I'd like to hear one of the issues for divestment campaigning from the original Don't Bank on the Bomb groups based out of PAX in the Netherlands was pretty much to convince people to engage with their bank or their pension fund and try to convince them to not invest in nuclear weapons. And then if that became a no, if there was never any progress after engaging, hopefully engaging, including meeting with bank CEOs and things like that, where in the Netherlands, they had a lot of success. It's never been any real success in the UK. At what point, here's my question now, at what point do you stop that approach and move to actually divesting the funds that are invested, either as individuals or your organization? So I'd like to hear what Kirsten and Ginzella might think about when you change your strategy. And then I'll make a quick remark, if I might, as a retired NHS clinician, doctor that's been retired for a while. I have an NHS pension fund. It was always our understanding that the pension fund is not invested in any way. It's ring-fenced government funds. So the point that was made that you can always withdraw from the NHS pension fund and put your contributions or your actual pension into one that's hopefully an ethical pension fund. But one needs to remember that any pension fund like that, you can end up with less pension than you might, because they're based on investments, so they can go up or down. So it depends on when you want to make where and when you want to make your statements. But so that was a small aside for Molly. But back to Kirsten and Ginzella.
It's really difficult as well because, of course, with inflation right now and an aging population, it's looking like our pensions are going to be a lot less valuable on both sides of that fence, which is a really important part of the discussion, right? Like, we can't be active campaigners thinking about system change when our basic communities through pensions and through our income and so on is not being met. It is a real issue, and I definitely don't have a clear answer from it. And I think, like, as Kirsten said, it's like getting that right balance between as good as you can with a secure pension, which is not the default investing in all arms companies possible. And then perhaps having a smaller pot with more ethical investment, so that you have that balance and you're splitting your portfolio. But anyway, I'm not a financial advisor. That's just kind of how I look at it. But in terms of getting the right balance between going through all the institutional checks and bounds and meeting the needs of universities or councils or government, to the point where they're not changing and it's not working, and having that tipping point where you try something else, it really, really depends on campaign capacity. I think it's something that I hear from Demilitarise Education's perspective, that academics and negotiators in senior leadership are more willing to talk with us because of our research position, and having that slightly separate, like, we obviously work with campaigners and wholeheartedly support encampments and all the direct actions, but we're slightly positioned on the outskirts of that, which makes us more approachable in the terms of negotiation. So yeah, we of course discuss as well, like, how long are we going to do this for until, you know, we have to shake things up, and it really will depend on our capacity and will depend on a continued measurement of how impactful and supportive our data is to the wider movement of precedent changing, right? And I think, again, Gaza has completely changed the way that our society is able to understand our contract with the status quo and with our legalities and power struggles and so on. And therefore, precedent has changed. And that is why King's College, Cambridge, of all universities, you know, one of the most colonially grounded universities in the world, is now actually feeling the sweat and needing to make public statements and change to try and adhere to the new precedent. So there's no clean-cut answer, but it's just continued awareness and scrutiny of our own practices.
Yeah, if I can add, it's definitely it is a good idea to just ask for what you want as a starting point. There is nothing wrong with saying, "Oh, I'm really worried about the situation," and writing people a letter. And I can't tell you the number of, in quotes, campaigns that we've won just by writing somebody a letter, and they go, "Actually, never thought of it like that. We're not doing that anymore." And it's just like, fine, we can't put it on the social media because it's just like, well, that was the thing that didn't happen. They just stopped doing it. So with the Barclays thing, you know, we wrote to them. We for, I would say, a good 3-4 months with open letters, handing in letters, you know, before we started protesting at their branches. But I have to say, they didn't even meet with us. And at a certain point, our friends at Palestine Action involved and started breaking their windows. And strangely, after that, we also noticed that the Barclays tended to kind of, should we say, focus Barclays' minds a little bit. So I think there is a moment when that comes, and I think that you can, as a campaigner, you can feel that moment. I would say, if you've got a live campaign, there comes a point when they start to treat you where you feel like they're treating you with absolute disdain, and when that moment comes, that's when you flip it over, I would say, because then you're moving from what you might call an insider campaign, where you're a beloved customer who's trying to shape the thing, into an outsider campaign of, yeah, I'm leaving you, and this is why, and I'm going to tell other people to do the same.
Thank you both. That's really helpful. Yeah, just really great reflections. Molly, and then if anyone has any further questions, please do raise a hand, because it might be our last one or two potentially. But Molly, go for it.
I think that's kind of what I wanted to ask, was kind of following on from what Chancella and Kirsten have just said about not just the NHS pension fund, but also like where I work, there's a Siemens lab. A lot of our X-ray kits, big tech kit is from Siemens, General Electric, companies that make components of weapons. And I guess it's about maybe for something to follow up after this meeting, but is there a MedAct campaign to pressurize government, NHS England, individual hospitals to divest pensions or look at alternative equipment suppliers, etc.? And if there isn't one, is there scope to start one and that kind of thing?
That's such a great question. I guess as a MedAct staff member, I can offer a response, which is to say that that really feels connected to the kind of boycott work that the Health Workers for a Free Palestine campaign have been leading on, really, around Palantir and the NHS. And I feel like that approach to identifying other companies that are, contracted with the NHS or affiliated in whatever way, that are involved with nuclear weapons manufacturing also would be a really useful potential piece of research for us to do, and then see, map where they are, map, what hospital sites they're present in, connect with the health workers based there, and see whether that mobilizes them not only to think about that particular company, but all of the various ties with nuclear weapons manufacturers that exist, both in their workplace and privately. So I guess as a process of outreach, recruitment, engagement from those spaces, but also an active boycott and materially really impactful action, I think that sounds really strategic, and it's something that we can definitely take away from this meeting. So thank you for the suggestion. And not to plug again, but there's a little Google form that we've linked to in the chat, because after all of these meetings, we just try and get a sense of people's areas of interest. So if anyone listening in is keen to maybe do something like that, like work with us on a bit of research on companies that are involved in nuclear weapons manufacturers but have an active presence in labs or NHS spaces, please do let us know, and we'd be really happy to support you in doing that under the umbrella of this campaign. But yeah, thank you for that suggestion. It's really a great one, I think. Michael?
Yeah, I just was going to echo what Sarah said, that to Molly's query, that the best thing I would encourage Molly to do is to join that Google Docs forum, if that's the right word, and stay involved with us. And if that's a particular interest of yours, Sarah and there's only really 4 or 5 people in the core divestment Don't Bank on the Bomb MedAct group in the UK. 3 of them aren't even here tonight, unfortunately. But if you were to get involved and want to pursue that, we are working with an academic down at the University of Sussex. Well, he's left Sussex, but he's still an academic who will mentor anyone wanting to take on small research projects. I think I could put it that way. And just put your information and join the nuclear weapons group, join MedAct if you're not in MedAct, and join the nuclear weapons group. It's not just for doctors, it's for all healthcare professionals. And we can talk about that in the nuclear weapons group and at our or the Don't Bank on the Bomb group meetings that we're having. And we're trying not to, and that invitation goes to everybody else who hasn't said anything yet tonight. People I don't know, but I can only see one on the screen. It's Matthew. I don't know if Matthew wants to get more involved. He made the mistake of showing himself. And but everyone is invited to at least join the Google Doc thing, and then put your interests and email Sarah about how they might go forward in getting more involved. But if there's just a few of us, we can't do all this that Kirsten and Ginzella are talking about. And they feel they have limited resources, but so do we. We have really, you can't compare limited resources, can you? But we need a few more people to get involved.
Thank you so much, Michael. That's exactly the kind of rallying call I feel like we needed. And yeah, I've just put my email in the chat. So if anyone does just want to drop me a line and organize one-to-one rather than doing all the forms, please feel free to do that as well. But yeah, if there aren't any final questions, I might just draw us to a close because we're heading close to 8 p.m. And yeah, there's only a couple of things that I had left to say, which were that the campaign right now has obviously produced its campaign toolkit. So please do share that in the spaces you're active in, or with other people who might be interested in this work. We've also produced like that open letter as well. So it'd be great if anyone could either post it to their local bank branch or take it in person and also get a photo up, because that's always really good for our social media. And yeah, just use that as an additional resource to amplify the demands of the campaign to those 5 specific banks in the UK. And yeah, and if you want to get more involved, I've already gone through the ways that you can. But just to name as well, I didn't say at the top of the meeting, but we've been really well supported over the last 6-7 months now by our Don't Bank on the Bomb project coordinator, Zara Kapasi, who unfortunately couldn't be with us here tonight because she's been quite unwell. And she's really sad about it because it would have been her last national network meeting as a kind of staff member with us, just because our contract's coming to an end. But to say, for the recording at least, we're really thankful for the kind of dedicated time that Zara's put into producing the resources we have and creating the infrastructure for the group. And she's also said that she'd want to stay involved as a volunteer, so you might see her if you come to a future meeting as well. But thank you, Zara, and I hope she's doing better. And also thank you to Kirsten, thank you to Jinsella, thank you to Stella and Nick, who've left us now. But all of your contributions were really helpful and really insightful for us and for everyone who joined. Like, it's been a really nice kind of stimulating conversation for myself too. So yeah, thank you for coming along. Please do, before you leave, click any of the links in the chat that you might lose. But we'll hopefully catch you at either a future network meeting or in a one-to-one with me in the future. So yeah, take care and have a good rest of your evenings. And thank you again, Kirsten and Jinsella. And yeah, thanks for your time.